That was a great introduction, Ian, and you saved me the trouble of actually having to describe what the book's about, because he did it extremely well, probably better than I could. I tend to stumble a bit when I try to explain what my own novels are about. Just want to say glad to be here, glad to have been invited. This is a part of a tradition. I was told for people who are awarded the Thomas H. Riddall Atlantic Fiction Award, and I was telling Karen and Ian back in the back room that I remember this library very well when I came from a town similar to the one described in this book, very small, rural, and I came to Halifax and I went to University of Kings, and I used to haunt this library because as I kind of figured as I was talking to them, I haunted it because it was the first really big library where I could get whatever I wanted. All I have to do is look it up. At home we had a bookmobile, which is fine, and it was great. But so I remember specifically even some of the titles that I took out of here over those couple of years that I was here, and so it's great to be back. Karen also said I could read whatever I wanted, and I've been reading a lot from this book. I'm doing a one book Nova Scotia tour, and I've been going around the province doing a lot of reading. So I instantly thought I'm going to read from my new novel, Advocate, but then I realized it's not really fair because none of you have read it. Hey, for all I know, none of you have read this one either, but at least you have the opportunity to read this one if you want, and the new one won't be out until May. So I decided to go ahead and just read from the book that I was awarded the Riddall Award for. And so just do a brief recap. So as Ian said, Jake has come home to reclaim his son from an abusive ex. And on the way he encounters, the story takes place over the course of just one day, and on the way he encounters a man named Johnny Lang, who's an old friend of his from school, who is a sociopath. When Jake comes back, Johnny Lang drops a couple hits of acid, has a few drinks of strong wine, and becomes basically a psychopath and decides that he wants to take Jake down. That Jake has gotten too big for his britches, and he wants to level the playing field, and he does so under threat of a gun. So the passage that I'm going to read you, Jake has just got away from Johnny and his gun in the woods outside Johnny's cabin. And he's on his way back to his ex's house, Carla, to pick up his son Nathan and get the hell out of there. And the book alternates between Jake's voice, the 28-year-old, and his son, who is an 8-year-old. There's no indication at all in the reading that you're switching from one person to another. You just kind of, the book the 8-year-old is written a little differently, and you can hear it in my voice when I read. You can hear the switch. I'm quite confident no one has ever had a problem figuring it out. So here we go. I make it all the way through the woods till I get to the river without seeing Johnny. Memmergoose bends to the east 1.5 miles below the 8 Mile Bridge and then bends back to the west before Johnny's. Below that is Great Falls, where Cleve Ramey built his wooden ramps every year and dipped Gaspereau for the market in Japan. When we were kids, we used to help him dip on Sunday for $0.25 a crate. Sometimes we'd come home with $2 or more, which we'd spend at Douglas's on Monday. My father didn't like Cleve because he didn't go to church and he didn't wash, and he exploited us boys from the village by making us work on Sunday when his regular crew wanted the day off. But we didn't mind. Once, when the planks on the ramp were soaked with foam from the river and treacherous, I slid off into the falls, but Cleve happened to be walking the ramp, a rare thing. He grabbed me by the collar and dragged me back out again. "Careful there, young fella," he said, reeking of pipe tobacco and sweat and fried fish, which his wife made him every morning for breakfast. "You go into those falls and you ain't gonna live to tell the tale." I loved dipping fish with Cleve, even beside the money. There was something about dipping a long pole into the falls and coming up with a net full of wriggling, silver-sided fish. We dumped them into the blue plastic crates and watched them flop and fight for breath, mouths gasping and eyes turning milk blue as the life slowly drained out of them. Some of the men Cleve hired would wait until the crates were filled with fish, then lug them back to the shore and dump them in bigger wooden crates on the truck. Cleve was too fat to dip, so he sat in a chair on the back of his truck and smoked his pipe and watched the dipping and kept a running tally of the crates being brought in from the ramps. Dad said he likely cheated us, but I didn't know if he did. I kept track of my own crates, and the number Cleve wrote down on his tally sheet at the end of the day always matched mine. When I reached the falls through the woods, I stopped because it is almost like I can see those days again. Sometimes this happens in North River. I run across some place I'd been when I was a kid, and the feeling of being back there is so strong, it's like there's two places, the one now pasted on top of the one then. When this happens, and I remember something about being a kid, like how good it was to be dipping fish for Cleve when I was 14, and how grown up I felt having all that responsibility and money, it's like this great empty space opens up inside of me I didn't even know was there. I feel almost like I want to cry. It's weird. Here I am, running from Johnny and soaked right through and coming out of the trees to the banks and the white water roar of the falls, and no one but Johnny and his gun for miles around, and I feel this way. Cleve Ramey has been dead for years, heart attack, and they tore down those dipping ramps ages ago. The Gaspereaux don't run like they used to. Acid rain from the States and Ontario has put paid to that. Same with the salmon. The only thing that runs like it used to is river eels, and even the Japanese got a limit on how many of those they'll take. But damned if I don't have one of those moments right then, when I can almost see us all again. And I picture the ramps out over the water and hear the shouting and laughing and old Cleve calling to his oldest son from his lawn chair on the back of his truck, "Get them goddamn crates out there, Aubrey. The boys need them." For a minute, I forget all about Nathan and Johnny and his gun. All I can remember is the past swirling up and around and across and over me like water, drowning me in memory. Every spring when he was home, Jake would take me up to the top of Harmony Lake Road in spring near the river to smash June bugs with badminton rackets. They made a loud pop when we hit them, and we smacked the bugs right out of the air. Jake kept score, and I always won. Once I killed 42 June bugs in one night. I asked Jake if it wasn't a sin to murder June bugs. "Nah," said Jake. "They don't feel. No bug feels." I wondered sometimes, though. Sometimes I wondered if everything didn't feel. But we did it anyway, because Jake said it was something he used to do when he was a kid at his house in Middlebridge, and I like to do things with Jake that he used to do when he was a kid. Like go with him to the North River Fair in September, and get on the Ferris wheel, and look out over everything from way up high. Sometimes the wheel stopped with us on top, and the chair rocked back and forth, and I was scared. But Jake said not to be. "It's safe, Squirt," he said. "Just enjoy the view." I told Jake it didn't look like North River at all. My old man always said when he took me up here when I was a kid that it was a God's eye view. "What's that mean, Jake?" Jake laughed. "You know what, Squirt? I have no idea." That was the same month Mom made Jake burn his papers, and though we were up high and at the fair and Jake would get me cotton candy after, I was sad. I could tell Jake was getting ready to leave, even though he never said anything to Mom or to me, and I was wondering if it wouldn't be for good. I almost asked him, but the Ferris wheel started again, and we were spun back to the ground. I start to walk down along the river towards the eddies below the falls. If it was summer and the river was low, I could have made it all the way across on the rocks at practically any point above or below without getting so much as a wet sneaker. But in August, the water starts to rise, and by late September, after the fall rains, the river runs fast and wide and unbroken from Memragoosh Lake to the ocean 20 miles away in Oldsport. The water is colder and the current swifter than she looks. I need to be careful where I step in. I think if I can get across the river here, I can get out to the highway number 7 and hitch or walk to Carla's. I don't give a thought what will happen when I get there or how I'm supposed to get back to the city without the Pinto. Below the second eddy is a place they call the salmon pool, where the salmon spawned before the acid rain killed them off, where the out-of-town fishermen would line the banks with their fly rods every May and June hoping to catch a salmon grilse. Below that is the Narrows, where the river pinches off to no more than a stone's throw across and runs shallow over rocks and sand for a quarter mile before she deepens and broadens and ambles on her way again. I decide to cross here. By the looks of it, the water isn't deep and I can get across no problem. I step in with my Nikes on. The water is freezing, and the current, even in these shallows, is strong, tugging at my legs and threatening to carry me off my feet and down the river if I'm not careful. For a moment, when I first wade into the river, it feels like I'm above myself again, staring down, and suddenly I feel the fool. Why don't I face Johnny Lang anyway, instead of running off like a scared cat and ending up here knee-deep and half froze to death in the river? But Johnny has a gun, I tell myself, and I don't. Maybe in a fair fight I could take him. And even if I couldn't, I would have the satisfaction of trying. But with Johnny, there's no such thing as a fair fight. If I try and get killed, what will happen to Nathan? There's no such thing as heroes. Anyone who stands up to Johnny Lang has to be stupid. Most would end up dragging their chicken ass across the river in September because they don't want to wind up dead. I wade further into the river, thinking this and that, and trying not to think about the water as it rises around me. I stop and gently place each foot ahead before I step, arms lifted to keep them dry, and so I won't lose my balance and go under. Then the bed of the river dips, and the water reaches my nuts, and the world turns blue for a minute. I gasp at the shock of it. The current pulls and pushes and is getting harder to fight. The river gurgles and murmurs and tugs seductively as it breaks around my waist, but I keep pushing on. Hey, McNeil. I don't bother to turn. There I am, standing in the middle of the river, my arms raised and water now up to my chest, and there's Johnny standing on the shore behind me. Maybe he had me in his sights all along and was waiting for me to wade into the river where I wouldn't be able to get away. Turn around, he says. Slowly, a few steps at a time, I shuffle around against the current till I am facing Johnny, arms still raised like I am being held up in a cheesy Western. Johnny stands there on the bank, holding the gun loosely at his waist but pointing at me. He's smiling. You're fucked, McNeil, he says. I wasn't going to shoot you, just scare you a little, but now I am. I know, I say, as Johnny slowly lifts the gun to his shoulder and aims it at my face. I close my eyes and wait for it, for whatever comes next. Let it be quick, I pray, though I don't believe in my father's God or in any God at all. The shot comes. The explosion echoes up and down the river, and suddenly I am underwater and being carried away by the current, and, for a while, in my confusion, I'm certain that this is what death is, this cold, swift numbness, this traveling towards something, God knows what, and the bittersweet, milk blue relief of not having to fight the current any longer. That's it. So, questions, I guess, about anything, really. Well, not about anything. There's some things I won't answer. About writing, books, this book, any other book you're writing.
Thank you for monitoring me on Q&A.
Oh, yeah, no problem. No,
Yes.
I'm used to doing that. No one ever offers that to
So
do that for
please,
me.
everyone, take this opportunity to ask this writer how he created that.
Yeah, go ahead. Two things. One is I didn't actually grow up in a town like North River is the name of this town, and it is a pretty desperate little place. And I didn't grow up in a place like that, but I grew up near one. And I went to school there, and things were so. No one seemed to actually want to think about the future when I was a kid. You know, it's normal for like most kids to think about the future. In this place, no one seemed to want to think about it. And I really felt that it was unusual, that there was something different about this town compared to the town that I grew up in, like a half an hour away, where kids were talking about the future, and you know. And so this desperate little place, I wanted to write about what it would be like to live in a place like that, and to have ambition and want to get out, and have constantly being pulled back there because of your ties, which happens all the time. It happens to all of us, actually. So that was my motivation for writing the book. Thanks, good question. Yeah, well, okay, I gotta say this, because I haven't actually ever explained this to anybody, but does everyone remember a reference to the water flowing on the river flowing to Oldsport? Oldsport is Thomas Rudall's fictional name in all his books for Liverpool. That anything fictional that dealt with Liverpool or mentioned Liverpool in the privateers he called Oldsport. So I took that, that's our thing together. So that's Liverpool. Tyler's Cape, which is also mentioned in the book once, is the name, of course, my place name for my first novel. And you can make, I mess with the landscapes and I mess with the people and I mess with the structures and everything about it. But ultimately, a sense of a place is often for me, it comes from somewhere real. It's not made up. Like North River is geographically very different from Caledonia where it's based, but it is, it's the sense of the place, this desperation that I was talking about, is present in both places. And same as Tyler's Cape, my first novel, was based on Port Mattoon, so I changed the landscape, and but the sense of the town was the same in both. So, does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, it depends on who you're asking, because I'm not going to change my writing style because I got a bad review. If I did, I wouldn't probably end up writing, because everyone gets bad reviews occasionally. But if it's your editor, or from your publisher or your agent making some suggestions, you've kind of got to use your own conscience to decide, are they really impinging on who I am as a writer? Or are they actually offering me valid feedback about what would improve this book? And there's only one way to do that. It rests with you. No one can tell you the difference. You're the one that's going to know. So I've had suggestions where, some radical suggestions where I took, even though it altered the book somewhat, because I knew ultimately it would make a better book. But I've had suggestions where I went, no, that is not something that I would ever do, and I have no interest in doing that. And you got to learn to go when, I don't know if you're publishing now, but if you're writing or whatever, but you got to learn to go with the mat with these editors. And it's easier when you've had a couple of books. Your first one, you're just so nervous about actually, I've actually got a publishing contract, right? So I'm going to do everything you say. So, but after a couple, you start to get more comfortable and you go to the mat with them. But you have to use your own conscience. Yeah. A couple of years, but I didn't write straight through. I'd write for a couple of weeks and I'd stop for a couple of weeks. This is unusual for me. I don't normally do that, but I did on this book. And I had other projects happening at the same time. So altogether 2 years, but I'd say in writing time, maybe 6 months. And it is a relatively short book too. Yeah, writers who are interested in publishing. Write well, and if right now you can't write well, then write often, and eventually you will write well. I honestly believe that. It worked for me, and I swear, I thought I had absolutely no ability when I started out. I just thought I was going to be another one, a writer who put some time in and then quit when he was like 25 or something, and I just didn't quit. I published for years without publishing. I wrote for years without publishing anything. And then I didn't actually get my first novel published till I was 30. So yeah, just keep writing. Eventually you'll produce something that's publishable. Yeah, I do both, like kind of raisins embedded in plum pudding. It's both for me. They have to both be there at the same time. I know writers who write from outlines. They'll outline a plot, and then they'll work with that. And then I know writers who work on characters and then put them through their paces. But if I was to really be forced to answer that question honestly, I think that if your characters are strong enough, you're always going to have a plot, because they're going to start doing stuff that you didn't anticipate. And that's such a great feeling when characters start to walk and talk on a page. So that's the kind of thing where you laugh at your own writing, right? You're writing along and then you giggle at how funny that really is. And that's great stuff. So for me, I'm a character-driven author, I think, more than anything. The plot's important, but characters, they need to be real and they need to be vital. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't have I had been getting up in the morning and writing since I don't remember when, since I was in high school, early high school, junior high. And it just had become a part of my life. And so it's just so natural to me to do that, and it has been all along, that I didn't really need to develop the discipline that some people talk about having to develop, because it was just seemed to be always there. And I wouldn't write for 8 hours. I often had a job, so I would write for 2. But I remember this one job that I had, and I was an executive director of this organization, this charity organization, and it was an enormously demanding job. So I'd have to be in to work at about 8. So I'd get up at 4 every morning and write. And then at night, I'd probably end up going to bed fairly early because I had to get up so early. Yeah, I don't think it has to. It depends on the person. It doesn't, for me, it's not an 8-hour day. It still isn't an 8-hour day. If, I'm working on a book and it's going well, I might write 4 or 5 hours. But I think it's the ability to get up and be in the same place at one point during the day. Like every day I'm going to be here, I'm going to be in this corner writing, even if I have nothing to write. Like even if I don't have, right now I've got a new novel coming out next May and I've got another one ready to go after that. So I'm not working on anything new. I still sit at that computer every day. I do the same thing. I think that's the key part, is that habit.
If you were to go back,
Actually, it's funny you say that, because 2 years ago, my sister brought a manila envelope full of stuff that I had written and then somehow ended up in her house. And among that was my first attempt at a novel. And I was, 20, 21, something like that. So I'd written 100, 150 pages of it. And so when my sister gave me this, I thought, boy, this is going to really stink. And you know what? It didn't. It wasn't a novel, and I didn't have enough life experience in that area to actually write a novel. But the writing line by line was actually surprisingly good. And I remember thinking, wow, because I thought I sucked really bad. Like I could never, I don't know if any of you are writing, it's like the rewriting obsession where you constantly rewrite. You're just constantly doing it over and over and over again until you've got nothing left. So you've completely destroyed what you were writing. I used to have that problem. So I was surprised. Now other stuff, I've seen other stuff too, which is just, I used way too many adjectives. I used a lot of, those old kind of writing cliches about show, don't tell, and, passive voice versus active voice. They're not necessarily true. You can show and not tell, and you can use passive voice rather than active voice if it suits the story. But I was doing it all the time, and so it was really noticeable that I had a lot of work to do. But that's why I continued to write. It's not supposed to be good. It wasn't supposed to be good when I was 15, right? And I loved what I was working on. I wrote horror stories. That's all I wrote. I don't know why, but that's all I wrote. Yeah. I am a reader. I go through phases because when I'm writing, I sometimes don't read as much. But what kind of writers influence my work? William Faulkner, Kurt Vonnegut, Dostoevsky. I'd say Tolstoy. I just love Tolstoy, but I don't think he influenced me. But Dostoevsky influenced me. Dostoevsky, I remember when I started reading him, and it was here actually, I think, I read Notes from the Underground, taken from this library. It was one of those books in my first year. I noticed that he never described a sunset or a field or a tree. He was only interested in people. That's like what people were thinking, what people were doing. And I found that I don't know if he inspired me to do it that way, but I'm the same. I'm only interested in what people are doing. I'm not interested in painting a visual picture for people to look at. Writing something more compelling about how someone's thinking is more in my lines. And Dostoevsky was like that too. And Vonnegut was actually similar to that too. So definitely. And William Faulkner for As I Lay Dying, which actually is quoted at the beginning of this book. Because, and have anybody read As I Lay Dying? Show hands. Oh, okay. Get that cup. Get it up. It's a brilliant book. It's a brilliant book. And it's written similar to this. It's written in alternating narratives between a whole family. And so this was like a conscious homage to As They Lay Dying.
Darren, I was wondering.
No, I just wanted, that's the thing. My relationship with the characters it's a book about fatherhood. And it's a book about being within each other and motivating each other just by the fact that we're related. And when that relationship was over, I had to stop writing. But I really wanted to go on and say, okay, everything's going to be fine. This guy's going to be great. And, of course I wanted to do that. Yeah, because you do get attached. And it sucks. And I went over, I drive over the bridge. Whenever I go over the McDonald Bridge or the McDonald Bridge, you can see the dockyards. Anybody familiar with that? You can actually see the dockyards from there. Jake works at the dockyards. And every time I look down on those dockyards, I think about him and my heart breaks just a little bit because it's sad, Don't blame me, it's just sad.
Not really. I haven't had that problem. I mean, maybe there are critics who think I've had that problem, but that's fine. They can think that. No, I don't think so. I mean, you know, there's a saying. I don't know who said it. Was it Allen Ginsberg that said "kill your was it Allen Ginsberg that said "kill your darlings"? Anybody know? Right offhand, I think it might have been Ginsberg. And you hear like. You hear variations on that in all kinds of writers groups and in, you know, people talking about writing, writers writing book about writing. You should only do to the character what the plot allows, right? We're not in control of the plot. If I'm not in control of it, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not in control of it. And if I am in control of it, it usually sucks. It's when everything starts to move on its own and you follow it, and your job is to keep up a description of what is happening in front of you and make that as accurate and as easy for the reader as possible to see. You're a window. You're not really doing anything but, you know, this vision. I don't know where they come from. If they come inside if people make them up inside their heads, if writers make it up inside their heads, or there comes from some other place where you've heard people say before it moves through me and all that kind of thing, I don't know. I do know that when it goes well, you're not in control. So it's not a matter of making your characters, you know, hurt or not hurt. It just happens. That answer it? Yeah. Okay, you're welcome. Yeah. So the process of publishing, I think I said it's you got to write, and you got to write a lot, and you got to write consistently, and develop your style, develop a voice. That'll all happen independently of you anyways. All you need to do is just show up every day. My first novel, Tyler's Cave, I knew it was a good book. Like, I knew when I was writing it that something had changed in me. There was a shift, and all of a sudden I realized that I had moved this place where people find themselves as a writer. I had done that, and I felt it as I was writing it. So I knew it was good. I knew it was probably publishable. But I got the market at that time, that was in 2001, 2000, was really difficult. It was a punishing book market like it is again today. So I got a few nice letters from agents and publishers. One publisher offered to publish it in the US if I changed Nova Scotia to Maine. And I was desperate. And I was desperate enough at that point to consider it. But in the end, we didn't do it. But I figured this is going to take a while. So I've got a good book. It's a difficult market. So I don't have an agent. I only have a limited amount of money. In those days, there was no electronic submissions at all. So a limited amount of money to send an entire manuscript, it's just like $40, $50, and then return postage for it to come back. So I decided just the hell with it. I'm going to self-publish it. So I did, and that's how I ended up in the Chronicle Herald bestseller list. About 3 weeks after it was published, it ended up there, and everyone, including myself, was very surprised. And then a publisher, I wrote my second novel, and my publisher now, Cormorant Books, saw the old self-published version, and they bought it and they reissued it. So I'm a fan of I think self-publishing in the right place, in the right time, and done the right way can launch a career. So that's one way of doing it. And then, you know, the other thing is like small publishers take bigger chances. So if you've written a book and you want to, you know, you're looking to get it published, do not overlook the small presses. First of all, the large presses, the really large ones, they're not going to look at you without an agent anyways. And agents are harder to get than publishers. Ever heard that? You've ever heard that whole deal? It's absolutely true. There are fewer of them, and they are particular. They're very careful about what they take because they're in it to make money. They're also in it to promote artists too. My agent is amazing, and she believes in me, and we've had a relationship for over 10 years. But in the end, it's probably easier to get a small publisher than it is to get an agent. And the other thing is publish pieces in journals and even on the net, like publish them, because when you write that letter with your first book and you're going to list what you have done, the more you have down there, the better. So like don't overlook the smallest publishing venue. Do them all. I could go on about that topic for days. Any more? Well, Publishers are, for some, publishers are taking less chances, particularly large publishers. There was a time where a publisher would publish, you know, it knew it was going to have a couple of bestsellers, a couple of big writers, and then it's going to have a mid-list. And then you're going to have the kind of the under that, which is usually the small press stuff. The mid-list book has disappeared, and no one really knows why. I mean, they say that the big box stores kills them. I'm not quite up on the economics of how that works. But it is true that big publishers simply want a sure thing. So they're not really taking anybody who isn't already contracted to them, or they have contract for first look, and they want the next big thing. And that's all they're willing to take. They're not willing to take chances like they used to be. I mean, if it was the next big thing, The Great Gatsby would have never been published. The first 30,000 copies of that, or however many come out, like the majority ended up in somebody's basement. Like the book just did not sell. So if we did in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s and the 50s what we're doing now, we would eliminate a whole raft of authors, including Faulkner and Hemingway and Knowles and a whole bunch. Yeah, so that's the problem today. And I think it's because they're scared. My agent explains to me, she says they're scared because of the internet and the ebook market and the ease of self-publishing, that they're just really scared that there's not enough market out there for the middle ground stuff. And but that being said, I really wouldn't worry about it too much, because if you write a good book and you find the right publisher, there are tons of small publishers in this country. You have a very vibrant industry. Canada Council supports them. So even when they don't make a ton of money from the books they sell, the government still gives them money to keep going, and that's an amazing thing. We're in a great country for that. So, you know, just submit your book, look at the publishers that you like, and there's any poets in the room? No? A couple of poets. There's a Poets and Writers website. Have you come across that website? Oh, it's brilliant. Every publication in North America, whether they take electronic submissions, when their reading periods is, whether it's basically all the information you could possibly want about publishers. They also do some nonfiction and short fiction, if there's any short fiction writers in the room too. So yeah, there are options. There are definitely options. Keep optimistic. Yeah.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Poets and Writers. Why they need to distinguish poets from writers, I have no idea, because they are basically the same thing. Any more questions? Okay, we're done.